So I was going to show you one small little trick or detail I do when I'm editing and there's hair in the way. So there's a blemish right here that I want to go ahead and get rid of. I'm going to zoom in. I'm at 500% on a pretty high resolution image, so this is a very minor detail. But sometimes it's a major detail in some photos. So I'm on the original layer. I'm going to take a nearby skin sample, as small as I can get away with, so maybe right there. I covered it up, but you'll notice it's also covered up the hair. So let me zoom in to 700%. I can actually redraw hair. I'm going to go ahead and take my eyedropper tool, sample some hair, create a new layer. I'm going to take our brush tool and make it the smallest I can get away with, maybe 3 pixels, maybe even 1. And I can actually go back and literally paint the hair in. Make sure I have a new layer. And let me make sure I sample the right color here. So let's say right about there, or maybe here. And I can, if you have a Wacom tablet, that's even better. You can just use your Wacom tablet and paint it back in. So it looks like we never covered it up. We can reduce the opacity, make it slightly translucent, and there you go. That was before, look at the blemish, and then after. You can actually repaint hair with the brush tool. So very minor details. So I have several different layers here of all the different blemishes I thought needed a separate layer. I'm just going to select them all. I'm just going to hold down Shift and select all and do my Command E. I'm going to merge all my layers really quickly. I'm very happy with how everything's blending. And I wanted to do one more thing. So you notice kind of this rough skin on her cheek. I kind of wanted to smooth that out, but I didn't want it to look really harsh. So I didn't want to use the blur tool or anything like that. So I'm going to create a new layer. This will be our cheek layer. I'm going to use the paintbrush tool. And first I'm going to take the eyedropper tool and I'm going to sample what I think would be a nice skin color for this. So maybe right about, and that might be too white, that might be too pink. So I'm just going to select right here. And I'm going to take my paintbrush tool and I'm going to paint her cheek a little bit to smooth it out. So I'm going to get a pretty, I'm going to always use feathered brushes when it comes to some of this work. Most of the time I use feathered. So I'm going to grab a pretty large feathered brush and I have my skin sample and I'm just going to start painting on my new layer. And this seems really dramatic, but we're going to definitely erase some of it. So now that we have that, we're going to reduce the opacity on it just a little bit. And I'm going to get the eraser tool and we're just going to clean it up. And here's what I'm going to do. I'm going to blend it and feather it even more. So I'm just going to reduce the opacity of my eraser tool. And I'm just going to reduce it even more and work my way kind of around the center of the cheek. And I probably need to erase a little bit here. Very little bit. I'm only at 15% opacity for the eraser tool. So very little. I'm going to reduce the opacity just a little more. So I'm going to go ahead and toggle my layer. This is the layer I just painted. That's before, that's after. And I wonder if I need to maybe darken it just a tad to kind of match the skin so it doesn't look like it's a big white. So there's our layer. It's very subtle. And what's great about having a separate layer is I can increase the opacity of that layer till I get the desired effect I want. And then I can go back and darken the skin, make it not look so powdery or white, like that. Increase the contrast maybe. Ooh, yeah, I like a little bit more pink in there. So now if we zoom out, we can toggle, see if we like the change. I think it needs more shadows, so I'm just going to select our layer and get our eraser tool. I go around a little bit. Maybe keep adjusting that brightness contrast just a little bit till we kind of get where we want. Okay, so that was before, that was after, and we can continue to mess with that too. We can also do that with the skin as well. So I'm going to do one more thing. I'm going to do the same thing we did with the cheek, but we're going to blend this entire shoulder. And since the shoulder has highlights and it also has midtones and then lowlights, we're going to actually have 3 different samples of brushes going all the way down, and then we're going to blend them to make it look a little more realistic. As opposed to the cheek where we just did one tone, we can just make it look a little more realistic. So let's create our first layer. We'll just do this light. And we're going to sample the lighter color of skin, maybe what we think is the average light color. So let's go ahead and grab our eyedropper tool. So I think that could be right around here. So I'm just selecting that kind of color right here. If you hold down, you can kind of see a sample of the color. And let's get our paintbrush tool and let's make it a little bit smaller, not by much. Let's go ahead and paint our light color, kind of where we think the light color is. And we'll call this the mid-tone. Do the same thing, sample kind of what we think is the average mid-tone, maybe right there. Go ahead and paint where we think the average mid-tone would be. And then we'll do dark. So if anybody's familiar with putting on makeup, it's a very similar concept. So this will be our dark. Maybe not too dark. I don't want it to be black. So maybe right here. And paint on our dark. That might not be dark enough, actually. Let's do a little bit darker sample. And then we paint. So now we can kind of, since this is on these are on separate layers, we can do some adjustments. So I'm going to take all 3 layers and reduce the opacity so you can kind of see the texture of the skin underneath. And we can blend the two a little bit better. So we can blend them by either erasing a little bit or we can blur them. So I'm going to actually combine all the layers. So all my 3 layers are now a separate layer. And I'm going to go ahead and erase, get my eraser tool, erase anything that shouldn't be, anything that's outside the shoulder. Shouldn't be there. And so let's blend these 3 different colors a little better. So let's go to blur. We can go to Gaussian blur, and that might blend them a little bit better. So let's test it out. So that's before, after, just kind of blends them just ever so slightly. Click OK, and then we're going to need to erase anything that came off the shoulder that doesn't need to be there. So I'm going to go ahead and toggle my layer. This is now our kind of, I'll just call it blend. I think that's another layer. That's on the cheek. That's the cheek layer. Okay, so I'm going to toggle my blend layer. Like I say, when I toggle things back and forth like that, I can catch mistakes. So I can see I need to erase a little bit up here. Let me increase my opacity of my eraser. I think that was the issue. So toggle, maybe do a reduced opacity and blend it a little better here in this area. So you can see how we blended the skin. It looks a little smoother, has a nice glow to it. So before, after, we could duplicate the layer, make it stronger. So that has a very, very nice smooth skin to it. So now I have these 2 layers. I like that, so I'm going to go ahead and combine those together. Before, after. Or let me go back to when I merged the layers. Let me reduce the opacity just a little bit. Maybe right there. I'm going to go ahead and merge all my layers. I'm pretty happy. I'm still not happy with the cheek, so I'll go back and mess with that. But I'll at least combine my new layer that we created here. So anyone who's familiar with makeup, same concept. We kind of draw it in different shades, blend it, erase anything on the outside, and you can create something that's pretty cool. So we'll go back and toggle our before. So this is our woman before. Still beautiful. But we kind of put a little bit more smoothness, took out some of the imperfections. And I'm really happy with the shoulder. I would probably go back and do the same thing I did with the shoulder with the cheek. Maybe add some shadows and blend those 2 instead of just doing one solid color on the cheek. I think that would blend a little bit better. But there you go.